Hello to everybody, and welcome to the Register's VDI in the Real World webinar. We are going to go over everything that there is about the basics of virtual desktop infrastructure. And with us today, we have representatives from Micron, nVidia, Atlantis Computing, and LoginVSI. There we go. So, to give us a good introduction here, LoginVSI, they do testing of VDI implementations. So if you have an infrastructure that you are proposing to use for VDI, you can toss LoginVSI at them and see if it's going to break or not. nVidia has grid cards available for VDI that allow you to basically do anything over VDI. I saw some demos of this stuff at VMworld, and it was pretty impressive. Apparently, you can play Crisis on that. Micron, of course, provides the SSDs necessary to make it all go. And Atlantis is basically providing the ability to grab a chunk of RAM and SSD on your system and use that to do deduplication of these available resources and get a lot more speed out of your existing storage infrastructure so that you can cram more VMs onto an existing server. In addition to these fellows here, we have Eric Wright, who is famous within the VDI world and within the virtualization world in a more large sense, for basically being smarter than me and most people that I have ever encountered. I'm going to hand off to everybody here to do a bit of an introduction on their own.
Wow, how can I ever follow that up? I'm humbled to have had that kind of an intro and glad to be on the panel. So my name is Eric Wright. I am a systems architect, a blogger. I blog at discoposse.com. Thus my Twitter name, if you saw in the original show notes, is at discoposse. Feel free to follow me there. And I'm also a cloud pundit, and part of that is sort of looking at the best and worst of things in virtualization and cloud, and trying to understand, the whole cloud and virtualization ecosystem and products. And I really focus on people, process, and technology, and especially the people and the process part much more than technology. And as we'll chat as we go through the session, VDI, it's of absolute importance that you understand the people and process part, because the technology can't necessarily save you depending on how the people use it. So that's where I come from, and I'm normally a resident of Toronto, Canada. I'm happy to be sitting in New York at the moment at the Cloud Expo, and I'll pass it along. Thank you very much, and I guess Adam, you're next.
Thanks, Eric. So my name is Adam Carter with LoginVSI, as Trevor previously mentioned. I've been with, actually just joined LoginVSI earlier this year after 16 years at Microsoft, where I was most recently the product manager for the VDI and RDS offering from that fine company. I've been a customer of LoginVSI for a couple of years, and was very impressed with their products and their offerings, and jumped at an opportunity to join them. As Trevor mentioned, we basically do capacity planning and testing software for VDI. We do that in a very clever way. We actually simulate user workloads. So if you want to know, hey, how many users can I get on the system before it falls over, or before the latency and performance gets low enough that users are going to complain about it, our software will tell you that. We'll start logging in users. There's automation where they start running Word, sending email through Outlook, surfing the web. We record all that performance, and we give you a report at the end of the test run to tell you, hey, you're great through 75, 76 users. That's the point where your performance starts to fall off and get a little too laggy for users to use in a worthwhile manner. So that's kind of what we do. We also we're looking at how to use the software in an ongoing way as well. Once you've got a deployment in place, how can you continue testing and measuring the impact of performance on your system. So we do some of that as well. That's me in a nutshell. Should I pass over to Scott, I guess?
Sure. Hi, this is Scott Shadley. I'm a Senior Manager of the Enterprise Storage Products Group here at Micron. Focus for us is to work on providing all of the various different solutions in the way of solid-state drives for various different forms of implementation, whether it be SATA, SAS, or PCIe solutions, and also to work with our customers to ensure that we're giving you the right solution. As we talked in the pre-show, not every system requires the same level of boost, or some systems require more or less, and we're able to help articulate and work with the customer base to understand which of those solid-state drive solutions are best fit. And I'll hand it on over to the next one.
So great. This is Will Wade with nVidia. I'm the director of our Grid product line. And just as Scott was talking about accelerating storage, Grid and nVidia are here to accelerate the user experience and specifically the visual computing part of that user experience, so that we can return the experience that customers and end users are used to on their desktop systems. We can deliver that from the cloud as well. So I'll show you how we deliver that level of experience and get people happy with using VDI as opposed to forced into using VDI. So we're gonna bring that visual computing experience to the VDI world, and we've got an offer for a free test drive here at the end. If you don't believe it yet, you can go check it out for yourself. So, all right, Seth, I think you're on as well.
Yeah. Seth Knox, I'm VP of Products at Atlantis Computing. Essentially, Atlantis is creating really high-performance, low-cost storage from a variety of different underlying resources, including shared storage you already have, RAM on the host, and presenting that to the virtual desktops. We've been deployed in some of the largest desktop virtualization deployments that are out there, and been doing it for 5+ years. So we work with nVidia, LoginVSI, other storage vendors and server vendors as part of deploying kind of large-scale successful VDI deployments.
Okay, well, thank you to everyone there. I'm going to jump into the questions here. I have a few pre-canned questions that I want to ask all of the participants. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to ask the question, and we're going to sort of iterate through the list. And I will pass them each the ball, so if they have any slides or demos that they want to use during their answer, they'll have the ability to do so. Before we do that, I want you to know that you can ask your questions in the chat, and Josh Folland will be curating them for us and doing things like combining similar questions, and he will be presenting those to us for a Q&A session after we've gone through the standard question set. So please, if you encounter anything that you want to have a little bit of extra clarity on, you have thought of something that you want to know a little bit more about, ask, and show no mercy. These people are here so that we can make sure that we get all of the information that we could possibly want, and we're not going to let them stick to marketing speak. All right. So the first question, and I'm going to start with Eric here, is what are the challenges surrounding VDI deployment today? Why is it not a simple, off-the-shelf, push-button simple affair that it is so often marketed to be?
A good question. Always the best place to start. I actually don't have any good presentation stuff to give, so I'm going to talk about personal experience. Typically what I find, and what's the biggest holdback to VDI deployments, successful VDI deployments, and high-performance VDI deployments, is the fact that we tend to just take what we do already on physical desktops, put that into a VDI environment. We're continuously sold on the idea that it's the year of VDI and that there's all these great things we're going to do. The other thing that's a big misnomer about VDI is that it's going to save you money. But it's actually not necessarily tangible savings directly, and especially you have to grow before you shrink. So I find a lot of folks get started with it and they'll spin up a VDI environment and they P2V their physical desktop. They take that as their clone. They try a few different pools based on those clones, and they'll try persistence, non-persistence, and it works. It does what they expect it to do, but then they run it at scale, and that could even be just beyond 10 to 20 to 50, and then they suddenly find out that something isn't going to work the way that they expected it. It doesn't scale out. It doesn't linearly give you back the performance that you'd expect. So what we have is now they hit this sort of impasse, like, oh, well, where do we need to go back and optimize? Then it becomes a hardware versus, imaging and process, and then typically we also run into a problem where a lot of the trials on VDI products are typically very short time frames, and there is a lot of care and feeding involved in getting things going. However, when you do get it up and you engage a VAR or a third-party service, usually that's the best way to go because they've done this repeatedly. So it's the folks that kind of garage sale it and they go it out on their own. They tend to hit the wall early, and then that becomes VDI doesn't work for us. It's an unfortunate negative. Like, it's attached to VDI, but VDI in itself is a great thing when it's properly utilized. So in my experience, like I said, it's usually the process isn't always applied well at the onset, and it creates a poor experience, and that's where the marketing doesn't actually work when we do the physical real deployments.
Interesting. Seth, what do you have to say here? What are the challenges around VDI deployment today, and why is it not as simple as it is often marketed to be?
Well, I think you have to start with the key, like the first premise that VDI is always competing with physical PCs on multiple fronts. So, you need to, from a user acceptance perspective, from a cost perspective, from an IT operations perspective, you have this, status quo model of doing desktop computing that's been around for a long time, and transitioning from that to VDI. As you do that, you have to pay attention to, what's the user experience in the virtual desktop? How does that compare to what people expect from their physical desktops? How does it compare to tablets? How does it compare to their personal devices? You have, from a cost perspective, you have to be, in line and be able to make a business case that, doesn't start with we're going to, cost double a physical PC up front or triple. While Eric pointed out, you probably aren't selling it or doing it based on upfront cost savings. You still need to have a reasonable cost going into a VDI program. So one of the, where we, come in and where a lot of the problems have been is in storage, because you're taking, and, graphics has a similar problem, right, which nVidia is addressing. But you're taking the hard drive of a physical PC, which has certain performance characteristics. So a very inexpensive physical PC that you buy today with a spinning disk is going to give you, certain performance characteristic. VDI is typically designed with much less storage performance, and the cost of the storage is much higher. So you're at a disadvantage in terms of competing with a physical PC because of the the architecture of VDI. Now there's a lot of ways to solve that today and get past that, but people need to understand that you're always competing with a physical PC and consumer devices, and you need to design the environment to make sure that users are enjoy using a virtual desktop and not that they're forced to switch from a physical PC that was better than what they get in terms of the virtual desktop. And that means you can't cut corners like turning off Windows indexing so that you can't search your virtual desktop. From a security perspective, you need to have the same level of kind of endpoint security. In terms of application launches, login times, just the general desktop performance needs to be there if you want the VDI deployment to be successful. So I'm not sure who's next.
Scott, I think you're up here. I'm going to pass you the ball. What is your take on all of this?
I think it's great. We've already heard from Eric and Seth, and both of them made comments related to the ideas that it's not as easy as it sounds because of the infrastructures that exist today versus what we're expecting from a user experience. And from a storage point of view, as Seth mentioned, that when you look at putting these platforms and solutions together, recreating that user experience is really the key. You can have a lot of fun on the back end as an IT, putting the system together and trying to play around with your existing infrastructure, not spending a lot of money, trying to avoid the forklift upgrade and go for screwdriver upgrade of hardware platforms, all to try to get the back end set up. But if the front end user experience is still delayed to the point previously made, that's really where it comes down to driving a lot of the serious problems or concerns, if you will, from that point of view, because you're not able to, no matter what you do with the back end hardware that you can support or add on to products you select, whether you put in a whole new infrastructure, if you're not getting the pipes right, or if you're not giving the end customer the exact replacement of what they had before, it tends to drive away from it. So yes, it can be easy to quote-unquote implement in some regards, but it doesn't give you the true replication of the solution, because you have to play around with the types of solutions and architectures put together. So, from our perspective, if you look at it from the storage point of view, that's one reason we do a lot with the customer base to understand forklift versus screwdriver, or current platforms, new platforms, but also just making sure that we help understand where at the top level stack as the user going into setting up that virtual desktop, that they are getting the experience that they want to get out of that, and articulating around it and having the partners and processes in place to make that happen.
All right. I guess, Will, you are up next. What do you have to say about the simplicity versus the marketing?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, because those of us that work in marketing are always going to market our products as the cure-all for everything. And we need, as IT managers, we need to go in and think better about this, as to really figure out what we're trying to do with our VDI deployment, right? VDI is not a one-size-fits-all, and so we need to set expectations up front as to what is the goal of our VDI deployment. As Eric mentioned, you can do VDI for cost, and if you're going to do that, you should set that expectation in your organization as to why you're doing VDI. We're doing VDI for cost, which means we're going to throw all end-user experience out the window, right? And if you set that as the goal of your VDI deployment, and your company has a culture of, the Dilbert cartoon of Murdoch, the IT guy that's a preventer of all productivity, IT or VDI for cost may work in your company, right? If you're trying to do VDI to make your company more productive and allow your users to work from anywhere and bring any device and be more collaborative, then you need to set that expectation up front and tell your CFO that, hey, we're going to do this VDI project, and it's not about cost, so don't put cost into the equation, right? Cost is very easy to measure. End-user experience is not very easy to measure. So the way you measure end-user experience with your VDI deployment is you go test and see how many people have gone around IT and bought their own device and brought it into work and are being productive, right? So set those expectations up front of why you want to do VDI, and then build and test to those goals, right? Don't set the expectation up front that you're going to deliver great end-user experience and enable your people to be more productive, and then go build a system focused on cost, because obviously those goals are conflicting. And that's a lot of what we see happening in VDI, is we have conflicting goals, right? So let's figure out how to build the right thing with the right goals in mind. And the other piece of advice we would have is, as Scott said, don't bring in the forklift and try and solve all problems at once. VDI someday will cure cancer, but let's set the expectations up front that we're just going to deliver a great end-user experience to a few users here, and we're not going to focus on cost in generation one. And the cool thing about VDI is that you can optimize over time. So our suggestion is always to overbuild that first pilot, get your users excited about it, and deliver a great experience, and then use tools like LoginVSI brings to the table to monitor over time what your end-user experience is looking like and what your usage of that resource is. And then you can increase your scalability or bring in the screwdriver upgrades over time and increase that density in the data center, monitor your costs, but don't try and do that density, costs, and everything up front, right? Bring in a small pilot, start that, and optimize over time, and then you can build out, if you go to 1,000 or 10,000 desktops, you can really do the optimization as you bring those online, and VDI is very flexible in that way. And just remember that one size, again, does not fit all. PCs that you're trying to replace range anywhere from a $300 PC that you can give to the security guy at the front desk to a $10,000 or $20,000 or higher workstation that you give to engineers, right? So don't try to force fit everybody into a VDI slot. Watch what your users are doing and assign those appropriately.
That makes good sense. Certainly reflects my own personal experience. Adam.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate what Will and Eric have said around cost. Part of the right way to do VDI is really identify why you're doing it and which groups of users that you're targeting. I always tell people if you're setting out to save money by doing VDI, you're going to be disappointed. You're buying server class hardware now, and it's always going to be more expensive than PC hardware. So do VDI for different reasons. Do it because you want to keep all the data in the data center absolutely secure. Do it for business continuity reasons, so that if you do, if the location goes down, you can fail over one of these desktops to another location of your cloud, so they can still get the work done. Those are the right reasons to think about doing VDI. But yeah, at least in an initial deployment, you're going to be disappointed if you think it's going to save money, unless your existing PC environment is so out of control and unmanaged. You just need to kind of nuke it from orbit and start over. The other challenge around VDI is that there's so many architecture options right now that you really can kind of get paralyzed just in the decision process of what you go with. Which hypervisor do we use? Do we do remote desktop sessions? Do we do full-fat VDI? Do we do pooled or personal VMs? Do we do local storage? Do we do SAN-attached storage? Do we do centralized network storage? There's so many different ways you can architect a VDI solution, and they all have merits. They're all the right way to do it, depending on your scenario. It can be hard to just get off the ground and figure out how you're going to start.
Makes sense. So my next question is, based on what we've just talked about there are obviously a lot of bottlenecks and design considerations behind the VDI. We've talked about, don't build this for cost. Build it for the specific solution that you're trying to achieve here. Roll them out in pilots, roll them out in small groups. One size does not fit all. But that being said, are there still some areas of VDI where we're going to see more bottlenecks more frequently than others, where just based on the technology that we have available to us today, we need to be more creative with the solution than just buying a bigger, badder box of fast? Eric, if you would be so kind as to take up the beginning of that one.
Sure. So typically what I found is exactly this, right? That it's not a one-size-fits-all. Graphics, I tend to see, graphic acceleration is great, but for the most part, a real good business use case for VDI typically is the more sort of commodity, traditional, maybe back office workers. The graphic acceleration is a real big hit because you can move great, powerful graphic, visually oriented workloads in there, and that's a great acceleration. But generally, the first pass we target are, sort of commodity, more generic workloads. Storage and storage I/O, both in sizing and in performance, and just the physical and logical layout of storage, nearly every time is the first thing that somebody hits the wall on. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of great products that have actual reference cases showing, here's X number of desktops on VDI. We've got some of the people that are in the chat. We won't mention any specific names. Maybe it rhymes with Nutanix, Tintry. We've got a lot of other guys that have great offerings, and that's their big target. Is they've seen that obviously storage is going to be a challenge. Looking at what Atlantis does with their product suite, it's exactly that. Is looking at aggregating performance storage and using the best of each in the right way, and that's probably where people are going to see the biggest win right out of the gate. Is they have to look at profiling that workload, and profiling a VDI workload is It's not just putting a user in there and using it. It's doing, automated testing where possible, but it is also having active use. We talked earlier before we started about deduplication, and anybody can just spin up 1,000 desktops and get amazing deduplication, but put 1,000 users in there, they're not going to get the same dedupe because they're actually using each workstation. There are 1,000 different people. There's DNA involved. As soon as you add DNA into any scenario on technology, it's not going to go as planned. So storage profiling is going to be one of the biggest spots where you need to look for it, in my opinion anyways.
All right. Wow, that definitely was pretty comprehensive. Let me hand that off. Adam, I'm going to hand that off to you next.
Sure. Yeah, in terms of pure bottlenecks, I think storage is generally the first one that customers run into. Earlier this month, I went and met with a customer who, just by switching to solid-state storage instead of spinning disk, was doubling the density in terms of the number of guest VMs they had on a host, because they were just hitting the bottleneck of storage. So I think storage is the biggest one. And there's lots of companies, of course, that have solutions for that and fixing that. But just this idea that where you used to have one hard drive, putting all those pieces together in one place, not adding all those extra drives to that for one of the other ones we see after that tends to be network bandwidth, and not so much the bandwidth, but actually the latency. If you really want to make a user experience bad, just add a little bit of jitter to the network or add a few extra milliseconds of latency, because that's what really makes a system seem like it's slow to a user while they're waiting for a screen to paint or they're waiting for a document to render or something. So I think bandwidth is the next one. The other design consideration I think that people don't think about, and I noticed there's a little bit of chat about this, everybody kind of has this romantic vision of sitting anywhere and pulling out their iPad and firing up the full version of Excel or Outlook or name your line of business app of choice and using it. And the reality is anybody that's tried that after about 5 minutes, the love affair with trying to use a touchscreen to and an on-screen keyboard to drive Excel or Outlook is a painful process. So I think Microsoft has made this investment now in touch experience, and they're really trying to push for that in Windows 8. So I think the apps will lag behind, but as those catch up and as more apps get designed with touch in mind, then that whole romantic idea of pulling out my phone and managing the server or pulling out my iPad to do some real work in Outlook itself, maybe down the road that becomes a little bit more of a reality. But those are things to be aware of now.
All right. The bottlenecks issue, I'm going to jump around a little bit here, and I'm actually going to hand that off to Will Wade next.
So being from NVIDIA and talking about bottlenecks, we would like to blame it all on storage, right? And no, I'm just kidding. Let me talk about what we do know. And since I am from NVIDIA, Eric kind of mentioned that the easiest users to deploy on VDI today are kind of those back office workers without a lot of need for visual interfaces. But one of the bottlenecks has been user experience, and it's not a measurable thing like bandwidth is, right, that Adam was just talking about. It's not measurable like CPU loading is or even IOPS, right? User experience tends to be the bottleneck that we've seen the most often in the deployments that we've been involved with. And yes, graphics at the high end for an engineer doing 3D CAD, obviously important. But the one that often gets overlooked is graphics for people who use everyday applications. If we think back to our desktop days when Windows first introduced Vista, there was a tool from Microsoft that went out and measured your system to see if it was upgradable to Vista, see if it had enough horsepower to do Vista. And one of the things that they recommended as a standard was that your PC have a graphics accelerator in it, right? And so when you run Windows, it's a graphics application. And delivering that from VDI is always going to take an impact, right? To render that on a CPU or to try and send that over the network in an unoptimized protocol, you're sending a graphics application just by being in the Windows operating system. Office 2013 now, all of the applications in Office 2013 are DirectX 9 based. So when you put up a chart in Excel, it's rendered on a graphics device. When you import an image or a picture or do a drawing in Word, those are all DirectX 9 and graphics accelerated. And so one of the things that often gets overlooked in VDI deployments is how am I going to accelerate that graphic? You can do that on a CPU. CPUs can render graphics. They're incredibly inefficient at it, and that's why every PC manufacturer in the post-Vista era has built a graphics processor into their PC. You can't buy a PC today without a graphics accelerator. So, most of those are integrated into the core processor, right, into the CPU. Intel has an integrated graphics, or AMD processors have an integrated graphics, and that's good enough for most people. When you go to VDI, those integrated graphics don't exist. All you have is a pure CPU, and you're trying to render graphics on a CPU, and that becomes a bottleneck. Not that it's a measurable bottleneck, but it becomes a user experience bottleneck, and people tend to not use your VDI deployment because the end user experience is so bad. So we believe that there's a need to accelerate the user experience, whether it's just rendering the Windows 7 desktop or if it's rendering 3D CAD. And if you can solve that user experience problem, the VDI deployment tends to go much easier.
I'm going to jump in on that one, Will. Actually, I'm going to ask you the question. As folks who've done this, obviously you specialize in the graphic side and the user experience side. What's the way that you find is the best way to do that UX experience and measure that? Because it's not necessarily measured by analytics. Do you use surveys? Do you sit down with user groups and do test groups? What do you find is the successful way to get that user experience captured and rendered out to a scale of 1 to 10 or whatnot?
Yeah, great question, Eric, because the bandwidth is easy to measure, the cost is easy to measure, the CPU loading is easy to measure, those tools for that, all of that data can be put into a spreadsheet. It's difficult to measure user experience. And as a result, we tend not to measure it because you can't put it in a spreadsheet and present it to your higher-ups or your executives, right? And that's the problem with a lot of our deployments. We highly, highly recommend pilot programs. Right? Let's get 10 users or 20 users or whoever whatever your sample size is for your company, and put those users on it and do a pilot for a good 2 to 3 months with those users and follow them along through that process and say, okay, what did work and what didn't work here, and how can we optimize for that and monitor that. And user surveys are great, right? Sending out a user survey once a week that focuses on a specific question of user experience, right? Don't have them fill out a 30-question user survey every week. But just, Friday every week, send out the, hey, how was the experience from a remote connection this week? Did you try it from home or did you try it from the client site? And what did you experience? Ask the iPad question, right? Did you try it from another device besides your desktop system, and what was the experience? Did you actually get benefit from that? Right? I see a couple questions coming in here about iPads and how to use iPads in this environment. We don't expect iPad or a tablet device to be the standard use case, right? We expect it to be a supplemental use case. So think of the architect who is the user of this system. An architect will sit at his desk 7 hours out of the day and do design on a big system, a large display with a keyboard and mouse. But when he wants to go to that client and do a design review, he can actually walk to the site where they're doing this stuff and do the design review on the iPad. So again, we encourage those pilot users to use all these different use cases and focus on, how was the user experience through that pilot process before you go and do the cost spreadsheet or the bandwidth spreadsheet, or, in parallel with doing all those things, also do that user surveying through your pilot program.
And if I can just add to that, LoginVSI, we really built the product around measuring user experience. So when you run a test load with LoginVSI, we have users log in and launch Word, and we actually time how long does it take for that Word window to render and appear in the remote session. When I do file open in Word, how long does it take that dialog box to appear? Well, that's actually all the data that LoginVSI captures, and that's how we generate our reports to give you indicative results of what kind of production environment that you're able to support. So we can start to do that, yeah, because a lot of times CPU load, storage I/O doesn't really tell you that you're at capacity, or maybe you're at capacity, but it's still not affecting user experience because it's doing a lot of aggressive caching or something like that in the background. So that's one of the things we really do focus on with LoginVSI. That's really the differentiator that we have against other products in the market, is we use real user workloads, and we allow customers to customize that to add their own line of business apps in there and see how those run.
Okay, I'm going to pass this off to Scott here. Now, Scott, of course, nVidia here had been jokingly poking fun at our storage vendors, saying, oh, well, naturally, they have to be the bottleneck. But I have to say, in the real world, my experience does reflect that storage is typically the biggest bottleneck. I do have to agree, if you have a good graphics card, it would make the user experience a lot better. Not having had much of a chance to play with grid cards yet, I don't get to use that in production. But
Right.
I do have to say that the storage side of things has been a problem no matter what we do. I mean, you have one computer, one user. Well, okay, you get a middlingly acceptable experience on a 7200 RPM drive. If you have an SSD, naturally that user has a much better experience. Try cramming 100 users into a single server, and, well, the IOPS for that have been tricky at best. So I'm very interested in your take on this.
Yeah, so I thought I'd have some fun and actually throw something up on the screen since we were talking specifically about how storage is impacting and everything like that. So it's very true. I mean, storage is definitely one of the greatest bottlenecks, if you will, but the beauty is there's storage solutions out there. It's a matter of picking and choosing the right type of a storage solution, if you will. So this is an example on the screen of where we put together basically a tech note or a white paper addressing hard drives versus a filer system versus solid-state storage, attach 45 in this case, just to pick a number, virtual machines attached to these certain architectures, and say, what can we get out of it? And what does it do for us as an end customer? And then you put together the snapshot, and here you go. So if you're talking latencies and or average boot time per server, you can see that, storage has been the bottleneck, and it will continue to be as long as the focus is around the concepts that I have to use hard drives because the dollar per gigabyte is so much better. And a lot of the conversations around storage as you get into virtualized environments is why I can't afford to put too much SSD, or I can't get enough SSD because the costs are too high or they're too low. This is an example with one PCIe card competing against an entire filer, competing against a hard disk array. And you can see that even from a latency perspective, which was also brought up as part of one of the conversation points, that the SSDs do help a significant amount with the latency, but there are aspects of even in this case, the true benefit of the PCIe SSD and the read latency isn't there because the bandwidth can't take it. The pipe isn't big enough to get the reads through. And so you still see a latency hit on the reads just because the architectures that are in the systems don't allow for the capability to get that data through. And we're working, of course, to solve that beyond a lot of other things. When we had the luxury of putting together a booth at VMworld last year, we had a live demo, and I couldn't find the slide on it, but we used traditional SATA SSDs that were able to launch numerous hundreds of VMs on one server with a couple of SATA SSDs. The bandwidth limits on that particular system to get beyond a couple of hundred VMs was DRAM in the system, which is something else we provide, but the capabilities of the server DRAM footprint, and or the pipe we had just going from the back of the booth to the front of the booth to be able to articulate the view of those VMs. So storage can certainly take a big hit. I'm proud to say that as a storage provider of solid state, it's not pointing at me, which is a great thing, and we're glad to be able to help support the market space and articulating and figuring out how to manage that and work around those types of architectures. And just as a comment back to the NVIDIA side, you made the statement that, you know, everybody's putting GPUs in their systems and things like that. I thought this was interesting. This is a blow-up of a white paper we did where some of our architects went in and had some fun and put together all the different tweaks that you can do to a given CPU platform and what true impact it has on the throughput of a given SSD architecture or use in a platform. So very much to your point that, you know, CPUs aren't the perfect solution. It is absolutely a marrying of all of the technology to truly drive the end solutions that make these things work the best and be able to get you prove out that, you know, one size doesn't fit all. There's aspects of every use model, case model, whether it be trying to do it through an iPad, doing it through, I'm launching 5,000 virtual desktops when we get platforms that can support those. And we utilize a lot of the tools, a lot of the folks on VSI is a great tool for us, in some cases, for us to do some benchmarking with it as well. So hopefully the storage moniker will go away as we see more and more people paying attention to the true benefits that the SSD architectures give you and are able to articulate, you know, it's not about the dollar per gigabyte, it's not about the dollar per IOP, it's about what is the true net benefit to the customer from the user experience, the application experience, and working around those TCOs much more than just the dollar per perspective.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand this over to Seth now.
Thanks, Trevor. Since Trevor told me that he got some requests to do demos as part of this, so I thought instead of answering the storage I/O bottleneck question, you know, by slides, that we do a little demo. So what we have here, I have two different virtual desktops. We have one where we've gone into the hypervisor and limited the number of IOPS that are available to that virtual desktop to 50 IOPS, which is probably on the high end of what a typical VDI deployment would be sized at, but is much lower than what a physical PC can deliver. And what we're going to do is we have a script here that launches all the Office applications and you know, browser, Acrobat, you know, a couple of common applications. And in the background there, you'll see that there's a performance monitor. This is just from the operating system. You can see that we're getting capped at a very low IOPS number. The 3,000 IOPS is the scale there, and you'll see why we do that in a minute. But you can see we're getting a max of 54 there. And we've clicked this script and we still haven't seen an application actually start. So we might have to wait a little while with this few IOPS. But let's go over and click on a desktop where we have the virtual desktop actually running in memory. So one of the things that Atlantis solution can do is you can run the VMDK or the virtual desktop itself in using host RAM. In combination, it could be also PCIe flash from Micron would be fine. You could front-end a traditional filer or SAN, and in any case, we're going to be accelerating the performance as well as reducing the size of the virtual desktop so that you can get more desktops onto a server. So now we're on the faster desktop. We have the same 3,000 IOPS scale, and we can launch the same application script. And you know, you'll see if you pay attention to the IOPS, it'll get covered there. But we'll probably generate, you know, over 1,000 IOPS would be my guess. But you know, we're launching about an app a second here. If you know, we'll go back and see how the other desktop is doing previously. And one of the things that is critical here is that this is also a persistent virtual desktop, right? This is a desktop that people can install their own apps. People can, you know, set their own settings. It's not using link clones or a typical stateless desktop environment. We've also turned on Windows indexing, so you can search on Outlook or do desktop search. And we've done a particular benchmark where we can benchmark the disk speed against a physical PC. So if you go look at the IOPS, we got into the 500s here. You can often generate, I've seen several thousand when launching a single app, depending on what the particular application is. So if you go ahead and look at Passmark, this is a DiskMark, basically a disk benchmarking test, and it'll go through and run sequential reads and writes, random reads and writes, and then benchmark against a physical PC. And essentially what you're showing here, and we can, you can kick one off, is a index score. So now you can use LoginVSI is a great tool to measure the overall user experience, which measures the app launch and all the other tools, and I'll let Adam talk about that. This particular benchmark can be run on an individual physical PC or an individual virtual desktop and measure different aspects. So here we've just done a disk test relative to a local SSD and a local 7200 RPM fast drive, basically on a physical PC. So that, if we go back to the other desktop, we had, and look at the IOPS, you can see it was capped there, and it took much longer for all the apps to load. So I thought I'd give a little impact there. Again, in terms of how you can architect things, it'll depend on what existing storage you have. As Eric mentioned, we can take advantage of all of the storage that you have available in your existing infrastructure. You can pool local SAS, local SSD, local PCIe flash, create a hyper-converged system on which you do VDI. You can run it all in memory. Really, it's flexible to the point where you can use software to create storage for all the virtual desktops that you need and do it very efficiently with a tremendous amount of IOPS. So most of the reference architectures that we've published have kind of an average of 300 plus IOPS per desktop, with the ability to burst up into the thousands very easily. So typically if you run like an iometer or some kind of storage benchmarking tool, you'll see the ability to get up to 30, 40, 50,000 IOPS on a single system. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to the next person.
Okay, well, I think that we've actually gotten to everybody for this one. Now we're into sort of the much shorter questions that I had that I don't imagine are going to take nearly so long to answer, but I'm going to pass this over to Eric here. And the question that I have is, of course, one truly near and dear to my own heart. Licensing. Is licensing, and very specifically Microsoft licensing surrounding client OSs, holding up widespread adoption of VDI? And what about the issues surrounding things like SPLA licensing and the ability to do multi-tenanting on cloud-scale deployments?
This is the one high dollar and most misunderstood piece of any VDI deployments. I often get this question where people say, oh, well, we're only using one image. Does that mean we only have to license one virtual machine? Well, no. Obviously, if you ask Microsoft themselves, this is what my deployment's going to look like, they will come back to you and say, this is what we believe it will be. Then you phone the 1-800 number again and you ask the same question and you get a different rep, and you ask them the same question, you may actually get a different answer. There's challenges even inside Microsoft to understand exactly what the use of, whereas I've got a physical desktop, do I get a paired VDI instance as long as I'm not in both at once? There's the Microsoft Office components, which is a whole other beast altogether. Definitely the service provider license agreement has been one of the most sought after licenses, because if we can get the capital and operational costs down on that, it's going to make for wicked adoption of VDI. I truthfully haven't gone deep enough to understand exactly where it even is right now, because it's a moving target. What you'll find is system integrators and system implementers get a little bit more down and dirty, and they've seen real live use cases. But again, it's a moving target. Whether you're at an open license, an enterprise agreement, or if you're just doing one-off deployments, it's variable. It's very variable. So you can actually go. There's a few folks that have different ways you can do calculators, and I know, and Trevor may know this, but actually I should use my Google Foo while I'm talking here, and there's a VDI calculator.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there's links to it off of some of Brian Madden's web pages.
That's what I was just thinking. I know Brian has some stuff. Obviously, Brian's been doing VDI for a little while, so much so that he's got his own conference about it. I know Andre Libovici has a VDI calculator that he also created, and I think that's more targeted for, it was originally targeted for Vue, but I think it has Citrix in there also. So, yeah, there's definitely, its results may vary, and it's also, it's based on your pool size, too. If you're going to deploy 10, then you'll be licensed a certain way. If you're going to be licensed for 100. So as you grow, your licensing, forms differently. Disaster recovery and VDI are the two most confusing bits on Microsoft licensing. The real answer for everything is always, it depends, and contact Microsoft. Take a look at other folks, take a look at VARs that have done this before in other use cases, and say, here's a proven use case that we know is kind of past the muster as far as, what a legally licensed implementation is. But, I think you nailed it with the question. And Trevor, I wish I had the right answer to say, like, oh, it's not a problem, but it absolutely is one of the biggest challenges around just understanding where things are, and the fact that the SPLA is a disturbing amount of money, and people aren't going to run to adopt that.
All right, well, I'm going to hand this over to Adam Carter next, who I know has spent some time sort of living and breathing this as well, and maybe he can enlighten us a little as to the horrors and hopefully simplicities of licensing.
There were, as I mentioned earlier, I spent 2 years as the Microsoft product manager for VDI, and I could always count on, didn't matter if it was speaking at a conference or, at a customer site around a boardroom table, there were always two questions I knew I was going to get. One was, when are you going to do iPad and Android clients, which Microsoft finally did last October. But the other question I always knew was going to come, I always hoped I could run out of time and not have to address it, but the other one was, can you explain the licensing to us?
Yeah, I believe that the third question is, and to any Microsoft licensing specialists who may be listening in on this, why do you hate us?
I used to joke that as the VDI product manager, I was the one product manager at Microsoft who wasn't actually allowed to market his product, because at the end of the day, Microsoft loves selling big fat full versions of Windows on desktops and laptops. The short version of the whole VDA thing is you need every copy of Windows that you're going to install for VDI, every image that someone's going to access, you need to have a license for it. The only version of Windows that's actually licensed to use that way in a virtual machine is Enterprise Edition. And there's basically two ways you can get that Enterprise Edition license. One is to buy software assurance for all your desktops. Once you buy software assurance, you get that access. That includes the access rights to a virtual version of that copy of Windows, which is the easiest way to do it. But then you get into the challenge of, well, we're buying thin client devices or we're buying iPads. We can't buy software assurance for Windows for those devices. So then what do we do? And that's where Microsoft says, well, what you can do is buy a VDA license for $100 a year. And basically that's what VDA is. It's a license to run a copy of Windows Enterprise in a virtual machine. So the easiest way to do it was software assurance, VDA, for all those devices you can't put under software assurance. That's the very short version of VDA. There's a few things customers are doing to get around that. And, if you're following any of the cloud providers with a desktop as a service, they've all figured this out and they're doing it this way. Windows Data Center Edition with Server 2012 is functionally identical to the standard edition. There's no difference in how many CPUs or how much RAM or anything you can do between standard and data center versions of Windows Server. The real difference is Data Center Edition allows for unlimited virtual copies on that same physical machine. So buy a server, buy a data center license, you can run unlimited virtual machines running data center on that piece of hardware. So what a lot of DAS providers have figured out is rather than mess around and try to figure out how to do this VDA pricing, they just buy data center server licenses and deploy VDI using Windows Server as the guest OS. Turn off all the functionality and turn off the desktop experience back so it behaves like a desktop. Looks and feels for the most part just like a desktop, but you've avoided all of the configuration with VDI. So when you look at Amazon Workspaces, when you look at the DAS offering that the Desktone stuff that VMware's offering now, everybody's doing it with. You look at the Windows desktop that you get; it's actually a Windows Server desktop because they're taking advantage of this data center licensing to get around VDA. I could go on and on about licensing. If people have questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A, and I'll answer them as we go. But I want to leave time for the other questions here.
Okay. I mean, that sounded pretty comprehensive on this. Does anybody else, any of the other panelists, have anything they want to add?
Yeah, this is Will. I agree. Eric and Adam answered that one pretty well. The only two comments I would have is that SPLA and enterprise hosted licenses are completely different. So don't get confused by being a service provider or being an enterprise and hosting your own private cloud or private data center. So make sure you check into that. And the second thing is that while Microsoft licensing is one of the big ones, also don't forget about your applications and check those licenses. It tends to be a little bit less complicated than Microsoft policies, but do check with your application vendors and make sure that licensing is okay in a virtualized environment.
Yeah, that's kind of, thanks for bringing that up because that's one I kind of forgot about. So when you look at the pricing that Amazon has put out for workspaces, they have a price with or without Office. And they're going to say, yeah, you can bring your own copy of Office and it's this price, or you can use this one that includes the SPLA license for Office. There's not actually any Microsoft Office license that allows for that bring your own scenario to take your licenses to a service provider. So where Amazon is saying just bring all licenses for Office, there's not actually a way that Microsoft supports for you to do that. I mean, Amazon is leaving it up to customers to figure that out on their own. But it is something to be aware of, that applications also need to be licensed, you know, and in many cases differently than the way you license them if they're on-premise or on physical machines.
All right. I guess if nobody else has anything, then I will move on to sort of the next question here. We're basically hitting the 1 hour mark. So it looks like we're going to go into a little bit of overtime here. The next question that I have is test environments. We talked about doing pilot deployments, but do you believe that setting up a test environment beforehand and maintaining one for use in the long term is critical to a successful VDI rollout, or is a pilot deployment good enough? Sorry?
I'd love to jump on that, Trevor, if I can. This is Will.
Absolutely.
We would encourage you to set up a test environment first and make that your pilot environment, and then also keep a sandbox for other experiments. I mentioned it earlier in the beginning of the call, is that you should optimize as you go, not optimize on the first implementation, because you'll set yourself up for failure. So set up that pilot environment and then set up a sandboxed environment where you can work on those optimizations over time and always keep that experiment going. I think that's extremely important to figure out how to optimize and throw in some experimental technologies, whether they're NVIDIA grid cards or Atlantis and Microsoft or Micron solutions, or any others that may be out there on the software or hardware side. You should always be playing with those to figure out if you can optimize your environment for cost or user experience, or just improving those things over time. It's really important. And I promised at the beginning, one of the things that we start out with is just a quick trial. We have a grid trial hosted online that anybody can go try, so they don't even have to build their own environment. You can go online at nvidia.com/trygrid and try out the free trial, for yourself. It's a 24-hour hosted, grid-powered graphics experience, and you can try the applications that we have pre-installed there, or you can bring your own applications and install them and just try it, to see how your application would work in a virtualized environment. So that would be a step one, and you can always use that in your experiments as well.
Yeah, I think Will nailed it. This is Adam. Yeah, I think having some kind of lab around that idea of continuous testing is really critical to be successful with a VDI environment. Anytime you're going to make any change to your physical environment, take advantage of a test environment and test it first. That's one of the things that we really encourage all our customers to do. Before you deploy the latest version or before you upgrade to the latest version of Office, run a test. Take advantage of some test automation like LoginVSI offers to find out how that's going to impact your VDI deployment. We've actually found, we've got a white paper on Office 2013. If you go from Office 2010 to Office 2013, you take about a 20% density hit in terms of how many virtual machines you can host on that piece of hardware. Because of, as Will mentioned, the Office 2013 apps are GPU accelerated now. If you don't have a GPU in your VDI host, then all that rendering is going to happen on the CPU and take a performance hit as a result. So we really encourage customers, do continuous testing before a service pack gets deployed, before you change your antivirus. Run it and simulate it in the test environment so you really know how it's going to impact production before you go out.
Okay, Eric, I'm interested in your take on this. My own personal experience is usually not just have a test environment, but make sure that your test environment isn't as cool as your production environment, because people in your production environment are going to hammer it more than you ever thought you would when you're doing your testing. How does that line up with your experience with VDI?
Very definitely. There's three questions that you should always say yes to. One is, do I need a change record for this? Two is, do I need a test environment for this? And three is, do I look good in this outfit? If you answer yes to any of those three, it's always the right answer. And I find this, in especially test environments, we spin up a quick little proof of concept. And those are very, very different. And you know this, Trevor, the stuff that you've done, your test lab and the work that you guys are doing over there is incredible, because you're not just having let's just spin it up and get the product working, but let's actually see real use case implementation and real performance implementation. So you'll have I usually keep it as three environments. My quick proof of concept, okay, I got it to work. Then my test environment, which is, let's do what I did in the proof of concept and spin it up to keep it there. And then, as the other fellows mentioned, that, and you say as well, that the production environment is going to be significantly different in its performance measurement and management. Obviously we throw the most hardware at it, but it also has kind of a different use case, because people don't live in that test environment every day. So you'll find you may find something weird in production. You've got to be able to take that back into test and have at least kind of an A/B test environment that you can do to say, okay, well, if I make this change, what's the before and after view of it? VDI is always a tough one, because, of course, we can't keep massive amounts of resources laying around, especially if you've got, multi-tiered disk implementations, using stuff like what Atlantis can do, and, with nVidia, with being able to try grid, outside your environments. Those are great tools, because you can leverage some of those tools, and you can sort of move things around, and it doesn't necessarily impact your real production stuff. But yeah, I say that testing is a necessity. We can quiesce it, because it doesn't necessarily have to get used all the time, but you've always got to have it at the ready, because there will be something that will come, and whether it's an application update or something that will eventually trigger an issue, then you've got to have a place you can go back and really kick the tires on it.
Cool. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, Trevor, this is Seth. I wanted to add a little bit to what Eric had said, and I think one of the really important points was having two different types of test environments available. So one that is, using something like LoginVSI, where you can actually benchmark in a specific test environment, allows you to compare, a change in your system and see what effect that has on density. So Adam made a great point around Office 2013. Turning on Windows indexing is another one that has a big hit on density, or using a certain antivirus. So one kind of benchmark where you can actually get consistent feedback on what a specific change to the environment does in terms of user experience and density is kind of one environment. And then the other one I would highly recommend is that you have some type of user acceptance test environment or UAT environment where you put real user, a sample or a subset of real users onto a production pilot type environment, so that if you do see anything in production that differs from your load generation tool like LoginVSI, that you can address that without having a big impact on the whole production environment. The other thing that I would caution that I see a lot in VDI is that people do their test environments aren't representative from a resource perspective of their production environments. So, for example, if you're using shared storage and you have a SAN for your test environment, don't run a single server worth of desktops against a whole SAN that's supposed to do several thousand desktops. Because if there's an I/O bottleneck that's introduced by, let's say, upgrading to Office 2013, where you've gone over the amount of I/O that SAN can handle, you're not going to see that because you don't have a representative unit of storage in your test environment. So it's a little bit easier if you're using local storage or you have a hyper-converged system, because the unit of test in your test environment only needs to be a single server at full density. But I've seen that mistake a lot, where people do a benchmark with LoginVSI, against a big SAN for 100 users. That's not really telling you anything about storage performance, right? You have to do 1,000 users against that same SAN, or you have to, cut up that SAN and limit the performance in a way that makes it representative of what will happen in your production environment.
Cool. Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, and I would say that, all of it is very true. There's absolutely a need to be able to do everything everybody said about, being able to play around and test these things out. It's great to have online tools available to manipulate those as well. And we realize that, if you look at it from a perspective of where I sit, I sell a hardware solution, which is a little bit harder to sample, if you will, to the broader market space. So we've actually implemented a new program at Micron where we make our large capacity, ultra-fast drives available for loaner type programs where we can let you borrow them for a few months, try them out, make sure they're the right fit for you, or if it doesn't happen to be PCIe, maybe the SATA drive will work. And so we know that by way of ensuring the test environments or even pre-production ones are necessary evil, we all have IT budgets. We can't afford to just go drop thousands of dollars potentially for a PCIe-like solution, or multiple servers worth of drives. We make those available for all as part of the solution.
If I can just butt in there for a second, anybody who is considering this, really, really honestly, do take Micron up on this. I only have the one P420M PCIe card, but it's amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. But yeah, and again, those are available for long-term loan, short-term loan, that type of stuff, try as you buy kind of thing. So we're understanding that we have to make sure the market has capability to, and our customers have a capability to understand that they're getting what they're paying for. Because, if we put one of our high-performance PCIe drives, because the numbers look right, but you plug it into an existing platform and you start running your tests and you realize you can't take full advantage of it. We've got other products that work. So.
Yeah, one thing that I'd like to add into that as well, when you're doing your testing for something like this, and as we're talking about these PCIe cards, it really does come to mind, is that you do actually have to throw the kind of workloads at it that you actually are intending on using. So a great example of this is that a PCIe card that we have, we actually put this in Josh's desktop PC for a little while because, he's a professional gamer and he plays all sorts of video games and figured if anybody is going to hammer this thing in a single user environment, it's going to be Josh. And nothing he could throw at it would even scratch the surface of what that drive was capable of. It really didn't give performance all that much better than a high-end consumer SSD. But you put that into a VDI environment where I was running 150 VMs on a single server, and the difference between that PCIe card and a consumer SSD was absolutely night and day. So just remember that when you start playing with the really high-end stuff like these PCIe cards, you're not going to be able to really stress these things in a single user environment enough to make any of this stuff tip over. You really are going to have to push it all to the absolute red line.
I think we're burying the real lead there, which is you can be a professional gamer. That's awesome.
There you go. I like it.
That was the one thing I definitely picked out of that conversation.
That's awesome.
Cool. Seth, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I was just going to say that in terms of the logistics of getting things available for lab, we just released a free version of Atlantis software that you can get at atlantiscomputing.com/elio. That is perfect for a test lab if you want to see what running a desktop completely in server RAM feels like. You can do it in your environment, put different types of VMs on it. The other thing that you can do is if you want to get a desktop, kind of like the nVidia offering where you can get a desktop for a week to play with that's hosted in our environment, you can do that type of testing as well, and that's very lightweight. You don't have to have any specific hardware, and you can get it up in less than an hour.
Cool. So we've got 2 free trials for everybody to try out here. Before we jump into the Q&A from the attendees, I just want to ask a very quick, where do you guys see the future of VDI going? And what do you want it to be able to do that it can't do today? And how close do you feel that we are to this? I'm just going to sort of throw the floor open to everybody here, and let's have a bit of an open discussion on the future of VDI.
Yeah, so this is Will. I'll be happy to jump on that one and see where we can go. I think the VDI is still a future, right? We don't have a huge deployment on VDI. There are customers who are deploying, but there is still a massive future for VDI or virtualization in general, I would say. So looking forward, I mean, we have a small percentage of our corporate and enterprise seats on VDI today, and I think that the current of VDI is private data center enterprise deployments, and that's the biggest opportunity in front of us all today. We're all excited about the cloud opportunity and what's out there, and I think there are things starting to happen in the cloud world where you can do a hybrid model or a public cloud deployment of your seats, but that's an interesting one to look forward to, and lots of challenges in that environment still to be worked out, but it's starting to happen now. So I think that the future is continue to deploy enterprise seats and look at the cloud opportunities, and then, of course, expand on that term VDI, right? What does VDI really mean? Do we really want to be hosting desktops in the future? And you can read all the books in Brian Madden's view of the future, but it may not be virtual desktops. It may be virtual something else. And I think that's the long-term future. We need to all figure out as an industry, is it desktops or something else? And where is that hosted from the private data center, from the cloud, from some other source? So I think it's got a rich future in front of us, and it's going to be an exciting market to watch. And as you said, we shouldn't expect this to be, even though you're looking at the future and looking at future technologies, don't expect that to be a solution today. Let's figure out what is available today to deploy that, and as an industry, keep looking to the future.
Awesome. I actually can't add anything to that. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Seth. I just wanted to add, we've been working with a lot of customers for 5+ years on deploying different types of VDI deployments. And one of the things we're seeing is, first of all, two of the big kind of barriers, to adoption have been kind of storage related, graphics related. I think to a large extent, those problems have been, solved at this point, and we're seeing a lot of customers move from, a small percentage of their users, maybe 10% of their users, to most of their users using VDI. I mean, we have an existing customer that has 100,000 users deployed. We have a bunch of 10,000 plus user implementations, and, a lot of customers' target is to get, a majority or a vast majority of their users onto VDI. As far as, kind of the longer-term future, I think, people who predict the demise of Windows OS and Windows-based applications, it's a little bit premature. There's a very long tail to those applications in, enterprise customers at least. Certainly over time, I think you're going to move to more desktop as a service, especially for smaller environments, because there's economies of scale there, there's expertise that you can bring to bear there. So certainly service providers will be able to do VDI more efficiently than customers that have 1,000 employees, right? They don't have specific VDI expertise. So I think more and more will move to DAS and cloud over time, but it's still fairly early in that process. There aren't, Windows licensing, as we talked about, is one of the impediments there. So I think we're overcoming that as well. So that's kind of what I would add, is that we're in a phase now where people have figured out VDI and are increasing the number of users they have in their environment with VDI. And then, we'll start to see some movement into desktop as a service, cloud implementations of VDI.
Yeah, I would echo everything these guys have said. I think that the cloud is the big focus. There's been kind of this pendulum swing. If you go back to the mid-'90s with Citrix Metaframe, that was kind of the first attempt at server-based computing, and it goes through this cycle of everybody tries to put everything in the data center, realize that there's some shortfallings there, and they go back to distributed PCs, and then it swings back again. I think the big difference this time, though, is network connectivity has finally become pretty ubiquitous. Other than the 20 minutes during takeoff and landing, I've pretty much got internet access anywhere I am now, so I can access that cloud-based or data center-based desktop, which we just really haven't had in the past. So I think that's a big reason you're going to see the adoption finally start to take off in the right way, because the infrastructure is much closer to being always on than it has been in the past.
Yeah, I've always, had the belief that VDI will explode the instant Microsoft decides it will explode. As soon as that licensing gets unhinged, I think every cloud provider and every, colo facility in the world is just going to start lighting up desktops by the thousands. And, I mean, we would be able to provide these entire managed environments that would be, free of malware. They'd be tested. They'd be always upgraded. And, finally, you won't have to go down to Aunt Tilly's house every couple of weeks and make sure that she hasn't managed to blow it up.
I think I'll jump in with my piece. I can say that, all the points that are made are bang on. We've hit all of the reasons why it's difficult, the ways that you can find efficiencies and get to that next step where you can see, get it into a proper lab. We have, we've got some of the teams here giving out great free resources. Utilize those resources. Look to other folks that have used this and had successes with it, because that's the way that you can map against it. Going towards the iterative approach, using agile approaches to how you're going to deploy these environments is going to be key as well. You have to be very, very active in understanding your business use case, because if we talk about VDI, and that in itself could be a whole hour. What is VDI? VDI is, I always talk about more like, it's virtual user productivity infrastructure rather than, desktop, because quite often people say, I need 10 virtual desktops. I said, okay, what are they going to do with it? Well, they're going to run this application. I'm like, okay, it's a C# client? No, it's a web application, but it has to be done from inside the environment. Like, well, why don't we just, poke a hole in the firewall and put it behind two-factor authentication? So those are the kinds of things where, if somebody comes to you with a solution, then you ask them, like, how about you come back to me with the requirements, and then they'll figure out what it is. We're going to see the morph towards more, desktop application infrastructure that moves out and becomes standalone apps. I think that's the real win. It's going to be a long haul, but, if you can put BCP and you can use VDI for BCP, it's one of the greatest use cases I've always had. It's an immediate win. It's easy to spin up. Even if it performs poorly, it's sure good to have 100 slower desktops than it is to have none. So, find your sweet spot where you can get it, and go out to folks, like LoginVSI, talk to the folks at nVidia, at Micron, at Atlantis. Go to these people and talk to guys like Trevor that do this all the time, and just reach out. We're always here, and the good thing is we've got a wide community of people. Read Brian Madden's blog. That'll keep you busy for a while. That talks about the big picture, but everything from small to medium business to Trevor and I face particular challenges because we work in Canada. We support financial services and health services environments. Very strict regulations on where the stuff gets held and hosted. So even that is a whole different use case. But there's so many great tools that are ahead of us, and it's the application development and the accelerations that are happening faster. I'm excited about it, that's for sure.
Cool. We have some user experience issues there that are definitely going to have to be discussed in a future webinar, I think. What is VDI, and does it have to be the desktop versus, various different ways to deliver the application? And I think the other big VDI-related webinar that we're going to have to do in the future here is going to have to be user virtualization and all of the technologies that surround that once you have decided that you are going to go into the desktop. For now, I think what we're going to do is move over to the attendee questions. And the first question that we have here, I'm assuming is directed here for NVIDIA. OpenGL versus DirectX acceleration. Which one and why, and where do we see the restrictions, and how does this make a difference to the end user experience?
Yeah, so great question. OpenGL and DirectX are two different graphics programming APIs. DirectX obviously hosted or led by Microsoft. So if your application doesn't live just on Microsoft, say for instance you have a Linux version of your application, you're going to want to use an OpenGL type thing, or Mac versions of applications use OpenGL. So that's the difference between the two APIs. The real question is, what does your application use, right? It's not about what are we going to accelerate in our virtual desktop, but we need to focus on what applications we're using in that virtual desktop. Our users don't pick OpenGL or DirectX except in Google Earth. That's the only application where you really get to pick. But other applications use those, one or the other of those programming interfaces, and as a result, that's what you have to accelerate in your virtual desktop. So once you go through your application inventory with your users, then you can look at them and say, okay, this application is OpenGL, this application is DirectX, and figure out how to accelerate those applications in virtual desktops. The good part about putting Grid in and our virtual GPU or Grid vGPU is that it uses our standard desktop graphics driver. So if it's accelerated on a desktop PC, the application will look at it the same way in a virtualized environment and be accelerated in the exact same way using the exact same driver. So it's that's one of the things that looks the same between PCs and virtualization, is that if you use our graphics driver with our Grid vGPU technology, or pass-through for that matter, it really doesn't matter what the application is programmed in because we've already optimized for that on the desktop, so the transition becomes much easier.
All right. That, I guess, solves that one. Thank you very much. The next is, what is the best approach to creating a VDI managed service? For example, when no user profiles or metrics are known. I'm going to throw that one at the LoginVSI guys because in terms of figuring out what to do, you are the masters.
Yeah, can you just repeat that question one time for me, Trevor?
What is the best approach to creating a VDI managed service? For example, when no user profile or metrics are known. I'm assuming that this is talking about standing up generic VDI instances in something like a cloud base for an unknown user profile.
Okay. Yeah, we do have, so I said we simulate user workloads, and we actually have defined kind of a task worker, knowledge worker, power worker type of workload that stress the system more or less depending on which workloads that you choose. So we've kind of adopted that as a way to say, well, you know, the customer can at least take a swag and say, well, probably 50% of our users are just going to be kind of task users, and maybe we have 25% that are heavy users and 25% that are lighter users. So our software does allow you to do that. You know, the other way to do it, there are great tools from Lakeside and Liquidware Labs that will do some of that profiling for you. We're actually install an agent on someone's physical PC, and it just measures what they actually do to let you generate some reports so you kind of get some indicative idea. But if you're a service provider and you really just have no idea what your users are going to look like, you just want to start offering desktop, then yeah, the workload that we offer will let you kind of baseline what a typical user might look like, or a typical set of users, what their performance metrics are going to look like.
Cool, thank you very much. The next question here is, what is the most cost-efficient methodology for transitioning users and applications from fat to thin? And I'm assuming that this is referring to persistent desktops being transitioned into non-persistent desktops.
This is Seth. I can give some comments on that one. I mean, I think the first thing to step back and look at why are you doing stateless desktops, and I think there's initially a lot of marketing around stateless being the better model because of the storage problems that were involved. Today with the technology that's out there, persistent desktops can be delivered at a very comparable cost to stateless desktops with comparable performance. So I think that's the first thing to address is, why are you doing stateless? If it's because you're trying to solve a storage problem, you shouldn't do it for that reason. If it's because you want to manage your desktops in a way where you have a single or a fewer number of images that are distributed out through link clones or Citrix PBS or MCS, then that transition involves a lot of moving parts, right? And once you get to the point where you have a stateless desktop, it can be much more efficient from a desktop management perspective, but you do have to implement user profile virtualization. You do have to virtualize apps that are not in the base image. You need to deal with whether your users need to install applications in their desktop or not, because if they do, that's not something that's going to be supported by default and is difficult to address. So I think there's, first of all, people should spend more time around the decision on whether to move to stateless, and it shouldn't be a foregone conclusion. There should be reasons behind it. Second is, profiling. So, someone mentioned Lakeside. That's a great tool we've seen a lot of customers use to profile which users make sense for stateless versus persistent desktops. They tend to be the ones that have fewer applications that can be addressed by putting them in the base image. The organizations that are less, a lot of the bigger companies that have thousands of applications, that becomes very difficult to go from persistent to stateless. So what I would say is, you need to address user virtualization, as Trevor mentioned. We need a whole other webinar on that topic if you want to go stateless. You need to address application virtualization and streaming, and then And there's tools available from the leading VDI providers, VMware and Citrix, to do that, as well as Microsoft. So, I think it's, in terms of stateless, obviously the storage aspect is critical. You have more options from a storage perspective. You can use local RAM or local SSD, for link clones versus user profile data can be put on separate storage. So there are some benefits that you have additional options, but there's a lot of things to think about before you go stateless.
Interesting. Anybody else have anything to add in that? Maybe Eric, with some of your experience?
Yeah, I think I can sort of, echo on what was brought up there, and continue that it's just understand your user requirements. That's the classic case of, here's a way that I want to do, I want to use this technology, and stateless and thin desktops and single instance deployments are great, but you have to make sure that it maps to the use case correctly, because you'll find that performance-wise, it may not be the right way to go, and it's generally, that's something we find out in practice. That's where those handy-dandy test labs are going to come in handy. Being able to see how it's going to come into play when it's actually put into use, watching how those, what's the user experience like on the stateless side when you do have stateful and, persistent desktops, or, at least persistent user profiles. Those user profiles also can get a little wild and unruly, moving from thick to thin and thin to thick. You're going to see a lot of different reasons why you should or shouldn't go, and some of them are hardware specific too. Unfortunately, there's no single answer for it, but it's, again, the key to success in VDI is mapping it to a real business use case, and then taking the performance and, creating a performance scenario around that specific business use case. So you're going to find that you have to do a lot of different things. It's a kind of a juggling act when you're running the VDI environment. But the good thing is there's lots of flexibility. Almost every single tool, just out of the box, has the capability to do 3, 4, 5 different ways of deploying an application or a desktop environment. So it's flavor to taste and see it in practice and in real experience, and then kind of decide where to go from there. Again, storage side, talk to your storage provider, because they may actually have a reference case and show you, again, comparative real deployments that have been done, sized appropriately, and then you can see how it's worked for other people as well.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of add on a little bit myself. When it comes to stateful versus stateless, one of the things to bear in mind is that when you're doing stateful deployments, you're probably building on existing expertise within your organization. Most organizations have the expertise to handle physical desktops, and a stateful desktop deployment in VDI is really no different. You don't have to learn an awful lot more to be able to do that. But to move to stateless, there are entire classes of new tools and technologies that you have to learn, because if you're going to do a stateless VDI deployment, you're going to have to do things like virtualizing applications, increasing user space virtualization. You're going to have to learn a lot more about how images are handled. So to move from stateful to stateless, you are definitely going to have to invest in an awful lot of training for your administrators. And more than anything else, that's going to be the expense, is the time necessary to do that. Once you're done, stateless can be a lot cheaper, but it is a big hurdle, and it's a big hurdle to understand how the tools work and to make sure that not only you can virtualize the apps that need to be virtualized in that fashion, but that licensing allows it. I've seen instances where specific application vendors will allow their applications to be used in a stateful VDI implementation, but not a stateless one. And with that, we have one last question here. somebody is exploring VDI for 3D apps currently running in computer labs at a university. Has anybody seen success with this use case under both VMware and Citrix, i.e. PC over IP and HDX Pro? I'll start off on this one, actually. Yes, I have seen 3D applications work entirely successfully in a VDI environment. In one of the very few cases where I've gotten to play with grid cards in the real world is where we have deployed a setup for a bunch of 3D animators where what they do is, they'll sit there and work in these 3D apps all day and then fire it off to this massive cluster to render. And we managed to cram 15 users that are doing some high-end 3D animation onto a single server and hand that out over a relatively smallish fiber line so that they can all work from home. I'm going to, I guess, hand that off to anybody else here. What are your guys' experiences with using 3D apps remotely?
Yeah, this is Will with nVidia. We have several colleges as well deploying this technology already. Matter of fact, it's one of the places we've seen it take off because they have a real need to get those PCs out of the lab environments and put them into a data center where you can use them from the lab or you can use them from your own device in the dorm or in the coffee shop or wherever. So it's a great use case for this, and we have seen it quite effectively. We've got several success stories that we've already published with our partners, both VMware and Citrix. So VMware, we had one that we just did a webinar on I think it was last week or week before on the site Collegiale. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it's a French university that is using VMware today. And we have a couple with Citrix as well. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of success with this in universities. And I actually sent the question, I sent a response to that question online and provided my email because we are very interested in helping move these along. So if you have any of those, please let me know, and we're happy to help with those.
Interesting. Eric, what about you? I know that you've done enough deployments of VDI. Have you seen any 3D applications being used in your environments?
This is actually the one I have to opt out of because I haven't specifically done 3D apps deployments. So unfortunately, I don't even have a real life case to be able to talk about with this one. I know I've talked with a lot of folks who've thought of it, but it's never actually got to the point of production implementation. So I don't have anything good to offer. I'm a bad panelist on this one.
Hey, Trevor, this is Seth. I've seen a bunch of deployments in our customer base, generally with nVidia grid cards. So we've seen one where they had a 3D application that was related to like a sporting industry, so it like tracked things about different sporting events, and it was a 3D application. We've seen healthcare organizations, so hospitals that do 3D imaging with Atlantis and the grid cards. We've seen colleges, and I'd say the one that we've seen a lot of is kind of science and research type implementation. So you mentioned kind of something that's like a lot of number crunching that can go on in a data center much better than on a physical PC, especially with distributed type deployments. So if someone is gathering a lot of data for science research experiments, and they're sending it's going into a data center, they can crunch the numbers there and access it from desktops that are in the same data center with a 3D application. I've seen that type of an implementation as well.
Cool. I think that about wraps up our webinar here. Unless anybody has any other questions, I'm going to just ask the panelists, do you guys have any closing comments to add?
This is Scott from Micron. I just want to say thanks again for sticking around to everybody that did and allowing us to share with you some insights from all the different companies. I think you've got a great cross-section of opportunities in industries and suppliers of either software or hardware solutions that are going to be able to help drive the future of VDI, and we're looking forward to being a good part of that for whoever would like to talk to us more about it, for sure.
Second that, this is Will. We appreciate you sticking around and listening in. Grab the chat window right now and remember to go try all those trials that are out there. So ours is out there, Seth put Atlantis is out there. You know, you can grab a couple of trials and a couple of tools. So grab that chat window before it disappears. Do a quick copy and paste into your email so you can get a link to all those trials that are out there and all the tools that are available from LoginVSI, Atlantis, and nVidia.
Yeah, this is Seth. I think Trevor mentioned that he might send out a follow-up with the links in case anybody wanted to do some testing or trials. So thank everybody for, I think we set a record in terms of webinar links, but I think it was all a great discussion and I love the format. So thank you everybody for attending, and hopefully we can get you all those links independent of the chat window.
Yeah.
I guess I'll close out. Oh, sorry, Trevor.
Oh, I was
do step on you there.
No, I was going to add that, you know, we will be asking all of the participants here, the panelists, to forward us their slides and some of their demo stuff so that if any of it gets missed by the recording stuff here, Josh is going to mash it all together into a nice little video for us so that we'll have all the information presented. So this will be available through our email push as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll just echo everybody else's comments. Thank you very much to everybody for sticking around. Trevor, thanks to you and the team for hosting. This has been really great. It really speaks to the amount of questions and amount of conversation that needs to be had around VDI, around not just VDI as a technology, but how we use it. The panelists have provided some really slick info. It's going to be great to get that out from the show notes, and definitely, we could continue on. We could probably make an 8-hour run out of this, and it's a sign that we'll continue on. And if folks want to reach out to us, then maybe we can do some breakout sessions that are more specific on a single use case, and we can do some more sort of targeted work on answering some of those questions. But I want to thank everybody for coming, and we look forward to the next opportunity to all get together.
Excellent. Well, thank you, and thanks to everybody for taking the time out to attend, and a special thank you to all the panelists. I know that this has gone way, way over length here. Our hour-long webinar has turned into an hour and 45 minutes. But as everybody had said, there's been a great deal of information here. We are obviously going to have follow-up webinars. I hope you will join us, and until then, thank you all, and we will see you at the next webinar.